The following is an exploration of different historical narratives and theories surrounding the Manson case. Some of the topics discussed are disturbing and include complex, unproven theories. The goal of this channel is to examine the evidence presented for all sides, not to endorse any single conclusion. Hello, and welcome to the Fairshake Files. Today, we are going to explore a story that many of us think we know. It's a story that has been told for 50 years, a story that in many ways came to define the end of an era. It involves the glamour of Hollywood, the idealism of the 1960s counterculture, and a series of crimes so brutal they seem to defy explanation. This is the story of Charles Manson and his family. The version we have been told is one of a charismatic cult leader who brainwashed his followers into committing murder. And while that version contains elements of the truth, it is far from the whole story. It's a narrative that was carefully constructed, legally necessary, and commercially successful. But it may have obscured a more complex and disturbing reality. In this account, we will journey through three distinct narratives, each supported by a different interpretation of the evidence. First, we will explore in detail the official story, the one presented in a courtroom and sold to the world as Helter Skelter. We will examine the evidence and the logic that led to the conviction of Charles Manson as the architect of one of the most infamous crimes in American history. Then, with a critical eye, we will look closely at the cracks in that official story. We will investigate the simpler, more logical motives that were known to investigators, but were ultimately sidelined. We will explore a world of drug deals, criminal rivalries, and copycat killings that paints a very different picture of the Manson family. And finally, we will consider the most unsettling possibility of all, that the Manson family was not an isolated phenomenon, but was instead an intersection point, a bloody nexus connected to a secret, undeclared war being waged by the United States government against its own citizens. We will delve into the documented realities of programs like mkultra and COINTELPRO and examine the troubling coincidences and circumstantial evidence that suggest Charles Manson may have been less of a mastermind and more of a monster manufactured in the shadows. This is not a story of simple good versus evil. It is a story about how history is made, how narratives are built, and how the truth can be far more complex and far more frightening than the legends that contain it. Part 1. The Tinderbox. The world that made Manson. Before we can understand the man, we must first understand the world that created him. The 1960s in America were not merely a backdrop for his crimes, but the very crucible in which the conditions for his rise were forged. It was a time of profound conflict, a society tearing at its own seams. The source of this conflict was a schism, a deep and widening chasm that separated the generations. This generation gap was fueled by a unique confluence of demographic and economic factors. The post-World War II baby boom produced the largest youth cohort in the nation's history. 76 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964. They came of age during a period of unparalleled economic prosperity. Unlike their parents, whose values were forged in the crucibles of the Great Depression and the patriotic certainty of World War II, this new generation had known only affluence. This economic security, which provided disposable income and expanded access to higher education, paradoxically enabled them to challenge the very foundations of the society they were set to inherit. The values of their parents, hard work, institutional religion, material success, seemed hollow, even hypocritical, when viewed against the backdrop of deep-seated racial injustice, and the escalating, televised horror of the Vietnam War. A new consciousness was dawning, and it had its own language: rock and roll. Artists like Bob Dylan and the Beatles became the poets of this rebellion, their lyrics dissected for meaning, their music the soundtrack for a cultural revolution. This sense of disillusionment was the fertile ground in which the counterculture grew. It was a search for a new way of living, for a new kind of community, for something authentic in a world that felt increasingly plastic and false. This search found its symbolic heart in a small neighborhood in San Francisco, the Haight-Ashbury district. In 1967, this neighborhood became a magnet for as many as 100,000 young people during what the media dubbed the Summer of Love. It was a massive, utopian experiment in communal living, artistic expression, and personal freedom, guided by the principle of rejecting consumerism and embracing shared experience. Groups like the Diggers, a radical community action group, provided free food, turning political protest into a form of public service. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as if a new, more compassionate society was possible. But the dream of the Haight-Ashbury was short-lived, and its collapse was brutal. The sheer number of arrivals overwhelmed the community. The ideals of peace and love quickly gave way to the harsh realities of overcrowding, poverty, and rampant crime. Hard drugs, particularly amphetamines and heroin, replaced the psychedelics that had once promised enlightenment, bringing with them violence and addiction. The ethos of free love curdled into exploitation. The Diggers, a local community group, grimly noted that the ideals of the movement had decayed into a harsh reality where exploitation and violence became commonplace. The utopia had collapsed into a predatory environment. It left thousands of disillusioned and vulnerable young people stranded, many of them teenage runaways, disconnected from their families, all of them looking for a leader, for a family that could offer them the safety and purpose the world had failed to provide. It was into this environment, a failed paradise filled with lost children, that a 32-year-old man named Charles Manson arrived in 1967, having just been released from prison after spending nearly half his life behind bars. Parallel to this social decay, a hidden war was being waged. In the halls of power, the counterculture was not seen as a youth movement, but as a subversive threat to national security. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was running a series of secret and illegal operations known collectively as COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence Program. Its documented mission was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any group considered politically objectionable. Using tactics ranging from planting false media stories to inciting violence between rival groups, COINTELPRO targeted civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., student activists, and the entire anti-war movement. Their greatest stated fear was the rise of a messiah who could unify these disparate factions into a cohesive revolutionary force. The existence of this program is not a theory, it is a documented fact, confirmed by the U.S. Senate's Church Committee in the 1970s. This climate of legitimate, state-sponsored paranoia is essential to understanding the darker narratives that would later emerge around the Manson case. It proves that the counterculture's deepest fears, that they were being watched, manipulated, and targeted by their own government, were not unfounded. It was in this tinderbox of cultural rebellion, social decay, and secret warfare that the fuse of the Manson family was lit. The Haight-Ashbury dream had collapsed into a predatory nightmare, creating a population of lost children desperate for a savior. And into that void walked a man who had spent his life mastering the art of manipulation. In our next file, we will examine the official story that the world was told, the story of a charismatic prophet, his brainwashed followers, and a bizarre apocalyptic prophecy known as Helter Skelter. To be sure you don't miss it, subscribe to the Fairshake files here on YouTube and turn on notifications. And if you prefer to listen, you can find the Fairshake files on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please share your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. Thank you for watching and listening.